Hey everybody, it's Erica, and I am so glad you are joining us today for a very important episode of Firestarters. This is Firestarter episode 4, What It's Like to Be Black in America. And I have a very special guest today. My guest is my good friend, David Lee. Hello, David. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Glad to be here.
Yes, so I'm really excited about this episode because I am all about learning and growing and expanding. And one thing I know what it's like for sure to be is white in America, because I'm white, if you didn't notice. But David here, I would love to just talk today about his perspective on what it's like to be Black in America. And not only that, David has a really unique perspective because David is half Black and half white. So he grew up with a white mom and a Black dad. And growing up in that environment where you could see the difference of treatment between your parents and just your own personal experience as a Black man here in this country. So before we get started, I was telling David that I grew up in a town where there were no Black people. There were no Black people. There was Officer Pribb. The police force in Kirtland, Ohio, visited the schools to teach the kids about safety and crossing the street. that was my experience of the police growing up, and my experience of the police growing up too, where I would speed 5 miles, 10 miles over the speed limit. I get pulled over, Miss Staggerwald, you need to slow down, have a very nice day. Thank you, officer, you too. That was my experience. I had one Asian kid in my entire school, and diversity was nil. I grew up in a family where there were people that were overtly racist, and there were some people that were really overtly racist. They were like, person's Black, and we'd all be like, grandma, like that's not cool. Like, in growing up, the culture I did, like, racism wasn't cool, but the whole idea was, as long as you're not a member of the Ku Klux Klan, you're not racist. Like, that was like the culture I grew up in. And so now that, I've broken out of Kirtland, Ohio, and I'm out in the world, and all of this is happening, my eyes are being blown wide open into what that means. And I think it's really important for everybody to hear the stories of why people are so charged about everything's going on and what's started this whole Black Lives Matter thing, why it matters. And I have said my piece on my background that Erica is learning and growing. And I'm here to talk to you today, David, to learn and grow. So just tell me wherever you want to start about your experience and everything going on.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Erica, and like, so many, everyone has different backgrounds from different locations, and each state does a lot of different things, from the next. But I can imagine, what it's like to be in just an all-white school with one Asian kid. That's interesting. But yeah. I will say this, I grew up half of my life in Charlotte, born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and schooling, I think it was actually cool for me. I love the school. I love the kids I went to school with down here in Charlotte. It was very diverse. So, racism, as you mentioned, my dad is Black and my mom is white. I will say this. I am so grateful that I am a mixed guy. Or as I call it, chocolate milk. Chocolate milk. Everyone loves chocolate milk. There's no way you can hate chocolate milk. So, if you do,
well, I hear you.
And if you do, exactly, absolutely. And if you do, I don't trust you. So, no, I grew up Black and white, as you can tell. My mom and dad met in the church down here, and the rest is history. My brother and my sister and I were born. And so growing up with a Black family and a white family, you have two different dynamics of what I learned. My mom's family is predominantly from the North, and my dad's from the South. So I learned cultural lessons from the North and the South.
Right.
You know, from foods to, you know, lifestyles to history, I was completely different. You know, I learned, you know, like I said, they're complete. My mom and dad are different personalities. My dad is the party goer, the entertainment guy, the life of the party, the extrovert. My mom is introvert. So I learned the difference, and that's why I say where it comes into race is because coming from Charlotte, I had a dynamic of friends who were all different races, all different backgrounds. So it was cool. And you think when you hear about race, you think, oh, the South. It's got to be the South. I didn't experience most of my racism until I ended up in New York. And that's sad because coming from the South, you would think like, oh, you know, this is a lot of my friends out here. There was blacks, Asians, Mexicans, Native Americans. It was just a big group of mixed families. It was just never a big thing. And then in 2001, when we moved to New York, and I went to a small town in upstate New York, great school, fantastic school, but similar to your situation in Ohio, I think there was like 5 black kids in the school, and my brother and my sister and I were 3 of them. So, it was like, I remember getting to the school, and it was just like, oh, there's black kids at our school. Oh my gosh, weird. But you know, at first I didn't pick up on anything. It was different. It was just a whole different environment. I grew up in the city down here, a city environment in Charlotte, and then upstate farm area, hunting, fishing, and it was whole lifestyle difference. So like I said,
what was that difference for you?
That difference was interesting because I'm like my dad. I'm the extrovert, the partier, like the entertainer. So coming from Charlotte to, oh, this is what's going on down here, to New York, it was like, whoa. So what do you guys do for fun? And it's like, we fish, we farm, and bonfires. And so that was like, okay, cool. But the thing that really kind of played a big role to me, I think, or impacted me a lot is, I remember being in a relationship, and I will do that. I will not name any names or kind of tell any specific situations, except how it impacts race-wise. I remember what really impacted me. I was 11 years old, 11 or 12, and I was dating at that time. And I remember being in a relationship, and I was forced to break up with the girlfriend I was with because her father found out I was black. Man, I cannot tell you, that hurt my core. And the thing that hit my mind first was like, man, I'm David Lee. Like, I literally love everyone. My mom's white, my dad's white. Why? My dad's black. Why is this an issue? Right. And I realized the environment that they were in, I think it comes down to an education thing. People, from what you hear and what you know, is people relate to what they know. And when people fear what they don't know. So when somebody comes in from a different territory, different color, different upbringing, it's scary to someone who doesn't know that. So they immediately assume when it comes to race issues, like, oh, you know, black people. Well, every time I think of black people, I think of the stuff I see on television and stereotypes. Like, oh, he must be either sports, you know, or criminal, or, you know, drug dealer, or, you know, all the things, the stereotypes that come into your mind. And I think that played a huge role in how people look at black people. So coming into New York, it was like, no one directly said, oh, you're the N-word, although I've had that experience. But I would usually get, well, you're different. You're different, Dave. You're not like the other ones. And that kind of hurt me because my family is black. Yeah. And no, I'm not different. I'm happen to be a lighter skin tone. And this is why when we talked about racism and white privilege, I have a privilege as a person who is mixed because I'm lighter skinned. So the darker your skin, the worse it gets. As a lighter skinned person, I feel like I've been able to benefit a little bit more than some who have darker skin. So it was just weird. Like I said, growing up city to country, and just the dynamic was just completely different. The types of people are just different. They're more tolerable down here in the South than they would be in the North, at least where my environment was.
Right. And what did that feel like for you when you were dating this girl and you found out you can't be together because of the way you look?
Shocked. Man, the girl herself was awesome. She I don't think it never impacted her. She was a cool person, not a big deal, but it comes back to her family, that how they grew up and what they know. Like I said, people, somebody coming from a different area, Black, I don't want my daughter. So what it's this, it's the stereotypes that people feel in their head that, oh, well, what if he's going to abuse my daughter, or he's going to take my daughter, or white should only marry whites and Black should marry Blacks. And that was foreign to me, because I'm like, I love people. So if you're a good person, I work that way. So to experience that was difficult, but I learned from that. I said, you know what? My goal was this. And I actually had a conversation with my boss recently about a similar thing.
Yeah.
When Black people interview for a job, you ever hear any Black people say, oh, well, I have to come in with using my white voice. Hi, how are you doing, sir? Very articulate, very professional, which you would want to do anyway, but you have to come in non-threatening. The reason you come in non-threatening is to let the guard down. If you're being interviewed by someone, your goal is to break that ice as quick as you can. So if I come in, hi, how are you doing? I'm David Lee, and I like to, it's the typical white voice, it's the stereotypical white voice. So it comes off non-threatening. So that way people say, oh, well, you're not like that ghetto guy that I think of when I think of Black people, and that's what bothers me. And so,
well, because it sounds, so from what you're telling me, there's this, like you said, there's this stereotype, like the way I sound, then people associate with me with being aggressive,
right,
dangerous, a threat, and you are already put in that box without hardly a word coming out of your mouth. And
right.
how does that feel stress-wise, and how does that feel emotionally when you go to, let's say, interview for a job, and do you always think about that when you're going to interview for a job? Do you as a Black man always think about that when you go to interview for a job?
Unfortunately, yes. And not even just jobs, even on vacation. Are we going to an area? Oh, and it's sad because like there's certain states and territories I wouldn't go into just because I'm like, I don't know how they're going to treat me. And I'm asking people, I'll look at reviews to see how, if there's any kind of any racial issues, or ask people who've been to those locations. But yes, jobs, absolutely go in there with the mindset of, and I know we like to talk about affirmative action, and I agree. What I really wish, if we could change anything, is we get rid of one of affirmative action, and I wish we get rid of race on applications. I feel like with race on applications, it takes away from the candidate itself, and so, and the requiring a photo. There's been several studies that's been done where they use a Black name and a white name, and same resume, the exact resume. And I think it was 73% of the time that white people got the job over the Black name, over the name. And that's wrong. That's wrong. I feel like going into an interview already thinking, will I come off, what should I wear? How should I sound? What should I do? Is this a job should I even apply for? Because like I said, it comes back to people's basic instinct. People fear what they don't know. And what we do is we go back to those fears of, well, this is what I saw on television, and this is what I know. And I'll give you one more example. After 9/11 happened, when I say Muslim, the first thing that pops in your head is most people think terrorists in America. That's what happens. Is because after that tragic event of 9/11, what it does is it creates a fear of, well, oh, Muslim, I'm going to associate Muslims with terrorists and destruction. And that's not necessarily the case. It's already judging someone or having a preconceived judgment about a person before meeting them. And there's almost 8 billion people on the planet that have different personalities. Right. And trying to put people in boxes and say that all Black people represent this and all white people represent that is wrong. So.
Sure. So with that, how growing up did you see those differences with your parents? Because like you said, your mom's white and your dad's Black, and you know your own experience, but now you have this experience of seeing what could be the different treatment of your parents. So I would love to hear your story about that. or any examples
Yes,
where
absolutely.
racism, this showed me racism was a real thing?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a very good question. And I'm a very transparent person. So
We're
for
raw
anyone
here. Rated R for
there we go.
Yeah.
So, I believe in being honest, because I feel like what's happening is a lack of education. When people don't understand, especially or believe the source is credible, they tend not to accept it as a real situation. So my family, like I said, grew up in the church, and my grandparents had a church, and my grandfather's family had a church. My dad's parents had a church, and that's how my mom and dad met. Well, however they got connected, my dad, like I said, grew up in the South. So there are even the South has their own history of racial issues, actually, and mostly racial issues down here in the South. And so it was different. So I'm sure early on it was like both families, my dad's side and my mom's side, down the line, somebody was like, "Oh, why are you dating a white girl, or why are you dating a black boy? Why couldn't you choose somebody of your own race?" And that's most families. And if people are being real with themselves, anybody who watches this knows every single family, what happens in the household, whether they discuss it on social media or not, but these conversations are what people have at the dinner table. Well, why didn't find a black boy you could have been with, or you didn't find a white girl or a white girl or white boy, and so on. And but my dad, if you know anything about my dad would date at the time. It would date anybody. If you were a good person and good personality, that was my dad. And so my mom was young. They were young kids, and my mom was the sweetest person. So she was, just, at the time it just worked. Yeah. But in my own family dynamic, it was like I said, those conversations are happening outside of my mom and dad. So initially, the two who connected are not having those discussions, but everyone else in this family are like, "Wow, really? That's what you went?" But after a while, your family dynamic accepts what the situation is. They knew my dad, they knew my mom, and my dad's family. I took my mom in, and it was just, this is what it was. And the same thing with my dad. My mom's family was just as accepting as my dad's family. But it took a while of people not understanding, why would you date the enemy? These are people who not specifically my mom's family, but these are the people, white people are the same people who took everything away from us and treated this way. You couldn't find anybody who just matches your skin tone. And but because they grew up in a church, I think that's what saved their relationship is just truly loving each other. And so anyway, they end up getting married, and here my brother, my sister, and I, the three of us from them, were born. And so, I've dealt with racism within my own family. And I think that was the hardest. That was, as a kid, I was 3 or 4 years old. And again, I don't want to get too specific, but I just remember being a kid and having to deal with that within my own family and not understanding why. What did I do? People don't realize we don't choose our skin tone. You didn't choose to be white. I didn't choose to be mixed. Right. So, and it's hard identifying as mixed. So white people don't consider me white. Black people don't consider me black. Although my family considers me black, but I'm just saying, it's like, no, you're not. You don't fall in either category. So I got between both races. It was like, well, you're the odd man out. You're with the black people. And then the black people are like, well, you're white skinned. You're light skinned. And you hear jokes like that all the time on the internet as well. Well, you're lighter. So
you experienced that in your own family, and you saw how both sides of the family had different points of view on, your mom or your dad. And you saw that treatment like fester on both sides. But then how did you see them treated outside of the family? As a white woman and then as a black man.
Right. So like I said, in North Carolina, we're still, like I said, still in the South. And there's areas and territories that my mom and dad couldn't even travel to, especially Hickory, North Carolina. And as I learned today, Monroe, North Carolina, was actually one of the most populated areas for KKK. But I remember stories from my mom and dad where they couldn't even travel certain areas together because of fear of racial issues. And then on top of that, going to restaurants where you're like, okay, it was early in the 90s. It was not, still even
Right.
Even in the 90s, it still wasn't accepted the way it is today. We've definitely changed a lot, and I think that's what's inspiring to me so much now. And even in the early 90s, it's like, okay, that was still like black, white. Why are you? And especially, I don't know if anybody knows it. Well, I'm sure people know this, but in 92, during the Rodney King case, it just sparked tensions at that point when the officers got off with the beating of Rodney King. And especially some of the rhetoric from the officers about the black people being criminals. So when that stuff happens, and here we are to George Floyd in 2020, but when that stuff happens, what it does is spark emotion, and then everyone goes to their corner. And it's like, well, see, there you go again, white people doing this, and black people, see, we can't trust you. Every time we get close, there's an issue, and everyone retreats to their corner.
Right.
And instead of, like I said, grouping a couple individuals as in a representation for the entire race. And like I said, we fall back into what we think. But yeah, it's different in the South, man. It was definitely different. A couple kids, I went to school with were racist down here. That's how people repeat what they know, and that starts with their family's generation and the generation before them. And that's how they were taught. Like I said, we were growing up in the South. That was acceptable.
Right.
Segregation happened in the 60s. You're talking about the whole that whole movement in the late 60s. So a lot of those people are still alive, still in power, and still grandparents of friends I went to school with. Some are judges, some are lawyers, some are CEOs, some are police chiefs, and so that resentment or dislike towards black people still it hasn't gone anywhere, because that generation's still here, and what they're doing is teaching their kids and their families why it's not good to intermingle relationships. And so, like I said, what I've done is taken an approach of sitting back, and as people know, my wife is white. I love it. To me, it's never been about white versus black. Is there white versus black tension? Yes, there is. But I do think majority of America does not feel a dislike for each other race-wise. There are pockets of both racist black people, racist white people, Native Americans, and everyone has some sort of bias towards each other. But it comes down to education. And like I mentioned before, I've learned more about black history, even myself, about black history in the last 2 months than my entire education growing up. You remember when we were in school, we did textbook. We used a textbook, and they told you to go page 13, chapter 2, and then, okay, we're done. We fill out the sheets, answer sheets, on to the next chapter. It was quick, boom, 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 and that was it. We learn these things to pass tests. And so a lot of people are finding out even what Juneteenth was for the first time, or Tulsa, or any of these major events happening in black cultures and black history. They're learning it for the first time, and I think that's what's inspiring me today. So
I hear that. And why, and from your perspective, you're saying that people who were taught that black people are different, and that there's potentially dangerous, and these general umbrellas of what people are, that they're in these political positions, and that there is this lack of history. Why do you think that matters so much? I mean, I know why I do, but I think a lot of people, especially people of color right now, are advocating for that. This has mattered for a long time.
Yes. And
where you brought up the point there that the majority of America is not overt, severe racist against race.
Yes.
But
I agree.
But even if you're not, again, we go back to that comment I made about just because if you're not a member of the Ku Klux Klan, don't mean there's not racism. How would you say that the people who aren't overtly racist are contributing to these systems that oppress and categorize black people?
Oh man, you just nailed a couple good points right there. So like I said, part of it goes back to education. A lot of people don't realize a lot of this, when I mention systemic or institutional racism, it's like, no, it's not. Here's the hard part. The first thing we want to do, our natural response, is to defend. When somebody calls you, think about, we'll just use a small an example of you're in the office at work, and your boss calls you in the office and say, hey, you're messing up. first thing you want to do is like, what? Why I'm messing up? No, Sheila's doing X. You want to call somebody else out for the things that they're doing, and not accept the responsibilities of things you've done. A lot of this stuff stems from history. The reason that there's tension with black people in the police force is because post-slavery, everyone assumed that after slavery ended a couple hundred years ago, that, black people were good to go. Everything was great and there should be no issue. But they don't realize as soon as slavery was over, they put laws and policies in place to keep black people enslaved. A lot of black people became indentured servants at that point. Right. So the same slave owners that they worked for, they had to go back to after slavery. So they never, and then what they did is strip them from their voting rights. So they stripped them from their voting rights. And then they wouldn't allow, when they did apply for jobs, what did they do? They selected people, they were very selective on the people that they wanted in there and what jobs that they got, how much you can earn, what you could do, who you could be around. And so after, slavery happened, so that period of time where blacks started to move on their own, all the way up to segregation, the segregation in 1967, 1968, people forget that they were using the police force at the time to pretty much corral. Remember, if you look at any photos of history where black people were doing sit-ins and doing those peaceful protests and they were being hosed down, people forget majority of the time that I can't remember whose presidency, where the KKK was one of the largest groups in America. The KKK was one of the largest groups in America. And like I said, these were judges, these were politicians, these were leaders. So when I mean institution, they were literally part of all the highest institutions, from college boards to police chiefs to lawyers. So, and you can watch any major movie, even Just Mercy recently just came out, and see that back in history, the same people who were in power still kept keeping black people down from doing anything. And people don't, today when we have these conversations like, oh, well, you're just as capable of getting a job as I am. Really? Like I said, I was just giving you an example about applying for a job. I have to go into a job immediately thinking I have to be water down who I am to become a acceptable candidate for you, to please you. Not even forget what my resume says. I have to now sell you on me and why I'm a good candidate versus someone else on top of my race. So race is the part of it. My job requirements are a part of it, but race plays another role. I have to then think in my mind at the same time this interview is going on, how do I come off as a nice black guy and not the threatening black guy?
Yeah. And so thank you for sharing that, when people are saying that to you, like, well, slavery ended 400, whatever, however, not even 400, God, I wish, several hundred years ago. And, that, affirmative action makes it easier or whatever. What emotions come up for you when you hear that? Because your experience is so not that, right?
Yeah, I recently watched a video.
It's all over, and race doesn't matter anymore.
It is. Honestly, Erica, what I view it as at this point in 2020 is playing a video. I mean, not a video game, playing a game. I watched a video of a young lady who was explaining racism into its purest form, and she used the game of Monopoly, and I think that was a great example. Racism and avoiding racist situations is like playing a game. Mm-hmm. Where do I go? What moves do I avoid this spot? Do I avoid these people so that I don't get myself in a situation we haven't even hit to the heavy stuff about being profiled or a gun put to my head. I didn't even talk about that stuff. But how does it make me feel? It makes me feel in 2020, why are we still having these conversations? And I mentioned to you before, I think what hurts me the most is the people that you love and care about, the people you went to school with, the people you grew up with, the people who are friends with you, who don't identify with being black or Spanish or any other race other than white. When they hear that that there's racism going on, their first response is to show you data and statistics. What they don't realize is, obviously, one, you can manipulate data and statistics to know what your argument is. But two, real life situations come into play that's like, you know who I am, you know my character.
Yeah.
So for me, as your friend, to say that I love you and I would do anything for you not to say, you know what, I don't care what the news news stations tells me. I know my friend is hurting, and that matters to me first. Let me find out from my friend how does that feel. And to be honest with you, I've seen two emotions. I have two emotions that's come into play recently. Very emotional. I'll say emotional because I'm hurt because I have friends who to this day deny that there's any issues. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is because of the television they watch or what their parents tell them. A lot of them don't, just lack the knowledge. And I can keep going back to education. People just don't know. So when you say, it's not good enough to just say, I'm not racist. My cousin and I had a conversation on the same topic. My cousin had a conversation who's white. He said, David, when I was in school, man, yeah, I heard all that stuff all the time. I went to school, there was a bunch of racist kids in my school. But at the time, I didn't call it out. Now, and I know he's not racist. He's my cousin. We're very close, white guy. And he said, no, I know. He's like, I'm not racist. I know that. But he said, what I didn't do, and I look back years later and I regret it, I never stopped it. I never started saying anything about it because they were picking on me. I'm not black.
Right.
I never stopped it. And so by not stopping it and intervening and saying, hey, this is not acceptable, he just let it play out. And so the people he grew up and cared about looked at him differently, like, yo, that's my boy. How could he not stand up for me? He knows me. He loves me. He knows I'm a good person. Yeah. Why do I have to keep validating myself to you over these names?
It sounds like that was a very betraying experience lately to be talking to people and you coming out and saying, hey, this is my experience, and people being like, well, no, racism doesn't exist, or that's not the real issue. And as a person who works in healing and mental health and overall well-being, what I've come to find is that the greatest need of humans is to be seen, heard, understood, and loved. And when we're not seen or heard or understood or loved, it feels awful. I mean, it just does. And when we can't be seen for there's a lot of talk right now, like, I don't see color.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't see color. I don't see, and that's great if you don't. It doesn't change the fact that systems, social studies books, law enforcement training, and a bunch of other systemic institutions do. Jobs erase.
Yes.
That it's one of those things where, as someone, again, who in my white privilege, you're like, I have to think about how I sound, how I look, all these things constantly before I go into a job. People talk about, I'm tired of hearing about racism. I think one of the things I thought, well, imagine living it.
Yes.
You're tired about hearing it, imagine living it. So I, like, for example, I've had a couple times where I've been discriminated against because I was a woman, very rare, and especially as a white woman. But the one time I really experienced discrimination was in Japan, and I was going into an onsen, and they asked me to leave because I had a tattoo. And women and tattoos in Japan is very taboo. And I thought, what bullshit is this? I was like, are you kidding me? And of course it wasn't fair and all that. And total BS. But what you sharing your experience, so many people of color are coming out sharing their experience. Yeah, imagine what it's like to experience that all the time. People are angry. People are tired. I can't imagine what it's like to experience that all the time.
Oh, man. So using those examples, I hate that what's going on right now. We have this false narrative that you have a false choice. It's like when people say Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, why do we have to choose? You shouldn't have to choose, pick one or the other. Right. How about support your fellow man? Officer, when the officer takes his uniform off, if he's a black man, he's still a black man under that uniform.
Yeah.
When a service member takes their uniform off, that's still a black woman. Black man, black woman, white, Asian. It doesn't make a difference. Once they take that uniform off, why don't you treat them with the same respect that you do when they have that uniform on? And that's the problem. It's a false choice. Unfortunately, black people can't take their skin off and say, "Hey, we're done being black now. Let's go do what we want to do now." And then there's news that you hear all over the place. Oh, kid had to stop wrestling, stop in a wrestling tournament because he had dreads and his hair was up, and he had went through the entire season, no issue, no one complained. There was no complaints whatsoever, and or the school wouldn't let him graduate because he had dreads. We find so many ways, but a lot of people, as you mentioned, well, I'm not racist, so it doesn't affect me, and that's the problem. People don't think about it. When it doesn't affect you or yours, it's not something that comes to mind. So you don't have.
Yes. And I'm sorry. Did you have a thought? I did not want to interrupt. I just wanted to.
No. Yeah. It's just like people don't think about it because it doesn't affect them. Meanwhile, it's somebody on the other side of that who's thinking, okay, I got to send my kid out to school. What are they dressed like? I don't want to make sure they're not wearing a hoodie out there because remember Trayvon Martin was wearing a hoodie with, he looked threatening. We're automatically taught fear. Mm-hmm. Fear. Oh man, if they're wearing baggy pants, when did baggy pants become the symbol of, oh, you should worry about them going to kill you? Mm-hmm. Like I said, people fear. It's automatically. So therefore, do I need to dress like I have, wearing a golf shorts and khaki pants? And I went to the University of Charleston or Princeton or Yale that have to dress like that to get your attention where you respect me.
Right. Or for you to do something. I think what I hear in all of that, putting that all together is, with how do I say this? With the Black Lives Matter, this call, it's really this call and this plea that, yes, you matter and you matter, but we matter too. And going back to your point about how probably the majority of these people in this country are not overtly discriminatory and racism. It's mm-hmm. the passiveness,
right?
The whole lack of action on the people who aren't racist.
Yes,
aren't racist, aren't side or who consider themselves non-racist. Mm-hmm. The lack of voting, the lack of political action, the lack of speaking up. It sounds like to me, and you can confirm or deny this, that's what Black people are most upset about.
Oh, Erica, man, that is, like I said, as I'm hearing what you're saying, I'm in my head. If you could just see the thoughts that go through my head.
Well, yes. I would love you to say them out loud.
Yes. Yeah, there we go. So absolutely, it kills me that people have to, at this point, still don't get the difference. Yes, all lives matter. Let me make this quite clear. Yes, all lives matter. God loves every single person on this planet. Every person is equal. Right. However, it's so disheartening that it bothers someone so much to say Black Lives Matter. What is at your core that you're fighting so hard to say, yeah, Black Lives Matter? It's like using the example. If I had a friend who was diagnosed with cancer, mm-hmm. and they're like, David, I need you. I'm going through this. Just your prayers, your love, your support. I'm going through cancer. I'm sick. Can you pray for me? Can you support me? Can you help raise money? Absolutely. I will. No doubt about it. So if one of my friends is dying from cancer, I wouldn't say, well, you have breast cancer. Well, hell, they have kidney cancer. All cancers matter. You know what? It's that's horrible. So what is it at your core that you're fighting within yourself to say, you know what, Black lives do matter? And like I said, because it's not affecting you or in the town that you lived in, like you mentioned in Ohio, where you live, you didn't see it. Right. We're in the town that I lived in, I did see it, or I did experience that.
You experienced it, right?
Exactly. So, and to the last point of what you said, for the people that you love and care about the most, it's okay to support Black culture. It's okay to listen to Black music. It's okay to have Black friends. It's okay to be around Black barbecues and family environments and so on. But when your Black friends saying, hey, this may not happen to me, but it's happening in my community. And I want you to stick up for me. I want you to stand up for me. And when you see racism, call it out. Mm-hmm. And if you cannot even do that, what does that say about you?
Mm-hmm. I hear you.
What does that say about you? When your friends, because everyone says, oh, I have Black friends. Well, yeah, that's great. You should have inclusive friends and diversity in your group, and that's fantastic. But if it's fighting at your core to not acknowledge that there's issues going on, whether you know that they're issues, they're not affecting you or your family. Mm-hmm. But if your friend is saying, hey, this is an issue, and just to bring it current with George Floyd, everyone wants to make it about George Floyd. This is not about George Floyd. Mm-hmm. This is hundreds of years worth of issues. And like I said, I referred back to 92, and this happened things have been going on over and over. I think what's missing here is not just racism. Racism is a huge part of it, but culture is a part of it. Education is a part of it. The people who are in Congress and in the Senate right now, older white guys who are creating these same policies. Black people don't care about you changing Aunt Jemima's bottle. They don't care about Uncle Ben. They do. There are people who absolutely do care about that. But what people want changed is legislation. They want rules, regulations changed. That's what impacts people. That's what truly creates change. In fact, we didn't have change even as a real estate agent.
Right.
We didn't have change in redlining and steering. And it was until the 1967, 1968 where we had, as the United States finally said, hey, well, we actually have to change these things. And you can, it's frustrating that people don't see those things. They had all white neighborhoods. They didn't even want any black people living in those neighborhoods. So if your education was, you couldn't vote. They didn't want you to vote. They were gerrymandering the election process. Mm-hmm. Your education was stymied based off what schools you could go to. Mm-hmm. When you worked, you had to work certain jobs. You weren't qualified to do other things, and you were treated as an animal. Those people, like I said, again, it goes right back to the education. And the last time we had change was in the 60s when they actually changed legislation to affect what we're doing today. And as a real estate agent, we see that. Does that still happen in every profession? Yes, that's the thing that's not talked about. And you're in your office, anybody who's watching this right now, I guarantee there's someone in your office right now, or whatever place of employment you're at, that have some sort of bias. It's like, and let me make this clear too, because this gets missed. This is not saying, hey, all white people, you're racist, or that there's not racism going on in any other culture. Yes, we know that. There are black racists, Asian racists, Latin racists, European racists. Racism exists, period, across the board. So this is not let's just all condemn all white people. That was never the goal. No. The goal is to call it out when you see it. Let's abolish it. Once we get rid of it, and I honestly, in my mind, I don't think that is ever going to be completely abolished. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Hate, you can't push out hate. But what you can do is acknowledge that was an issue. Mm-hmm. It's like a rape victim. Once you acknowledge that it was an issue, you can help that rape victim will never forget what happened. You can help them cope with what's going on now and help them work things out for their future. How do they take control of their life in a way that's meaningful to them? So when you can't even acknowledge there's an issue going on, that leads to greater stress, depression, anxiety around white people.
It does, 100%. So it sounds like what you're asking for, I'm talking to one person right now, but I've heard this over and over again, is this plea for all of us, most importantly, people who consider themselves not racist, to open their eyes and their ears, that there is this request to take action.
Yes. Absolutely.
There was a request to take action that in order for racism for these systems that are not treating our Black brothers and sisters well to be reformed, we have to take action.
Yes. And to that note as well, I had a conversation with my neighbor last night. We had a good conversation, and this is how you fix problems. You have uncomfortable conversations. No one likes to talk politics. Think about this, it's very taboo. You don't go to any dinner party, you'll talk politics or racism. But it always seems to come up during Thanksgiving dinner. We want to talk about both. So Thanksgiving dinner, there's always that one uncle who literally starts the match and just lights a match and boom.
I know.
So, but another thing I want people to know is this. So I have some officer friends, and this is so important. So I appreciate you giving me a platform to kind of say this. I have friends who are officers, and And I've had some very deep conversations with these people. No, I don't think there is a, people use the example, there's bad apples in the police force. Yes, there are bad apples. I think the problem that keeps getting missed and overlooked is dealing with those bad apples appropriately. I know the big talking point's been is defunding the police and getting rid of the police force. I think that's crazy. Although we do defund school programs all the time and reallocate funds other places. Right. But what I would have really loved to see, and again, it comes down to policy changes, is that we give the officers a livable wage. Mm-hmm. We also require officers to have mental health training. Mental health access. So when a lot of officers, the statistics on officers abusing their family members, wife and kids is too high, because they're letting that stress out in areas that shouldn't be. Their families are taking the toll on that. It's taking the toll on their families. So offering them a mental health option or a requirement, getting them crisis management trainings, so the appropriate training that they need to do their job effectively. And lastly is to be a cosmetologist or a hair salon owner, you have to go to school for at least a year and a half, 18 months, I believe it is, to get your license. We require officers to get to become an officer in 6 months. Mm-hmm. It's sad. That is sad. I believe all the people who are serving our country, whether it be the healthcare system, our police force, our military, those people right there are risking so much to help to take care of so many people. Right. So with them not having the adequate support, it creates more stress. So when they do see that guy with baggy pants on, they're automatically triggered to, whoa, this may be out of fear. And you notice the difference between a military person who comes back and who has the adequate training in dealing with crisis management. Right. When there's a crisis, they know how to de-escalate the situation, resolve it, and handle it as it comes. With our officers, I feel like officers are forced to do so much and don't get the same, respect as the military does when it comes to doing that job. I know, it's one thing to say Blue Lives Matter and put a sticker on your car, but then what? What do you do after that? Right. But what happens after the conversation? Right. So I think what I'm hopeful for now is I've seen more people across my Facebook timeline. You know what? They want to change. I think right now, why it's so a big impact right now is because after the George Floyd situation happened, a lot of people said, okay, enough. Even Black people, white people, everyone said, you know what? This is wrong. Yeah. So what it did is open that dialogue for just that window to say, hey, this is time to have a conversation now. Let's have that conversation. So that window, before it closes, while everyone's emotions still up on that same passion right now on that topic, let's get it out. Let's come to a resolution. Yeah. And so right now we have an option to learn. We have an opportunity to learn, discuss it with people who may be ignorant to this situation, mm-hmm. and help inform them on topics they don't know about. Like I said, my wife's reading books about Black history. Yeah. And things that happen. My family's taking the initiative to say, what didn't I know? I myself, I'm learning a lot that I didn't know. Right. And so, like I said, I keep going back to education. People are ignorant until they're informed. Yeah. So, and when they start to learn from other people's experiences, they can then, I say, you know what? Next time that comes up, I got you, Dave. I understand. I can understand why you're having that conversation. Instead, we don't have to keep going back to, well, all lives matter. Right. Let's talk. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So now let's take that same energy that we're all, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, whatever sticker you want to put on your car. Let's use that same energy to get policy changes. Let's get rid of race on applications. Let's get rid of affirmative action. Let's stop using stupid stereotypes about people. Mm-hmm. And last point, and I'll turn it back to you for a second, is when I was in college, I went through a diversity training, part of my leadership program. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the most impactful trainings I've ever been through. And so they had a room full of, shout out to TC3. So it was a room full of probably a couple hundred students. And what they did was they had students from, Black, white, Asian, Native American, all different races, different age groups and so on. And so what the instructor did was everyone who identified, who grew up in the country, stand up. And everyone who's sitting down, clap for them. Mm-hmm. And then they sat down. So everyone looked around and it was people from different races, different economic statuses. And then they said, okay, you sit down. Everyone who is a middle child, stand up.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone who's not a middle child, start clapping for them.
Right.
So it validated them, like, oh my gosh, you're black. Oh, middle child love right here.
Yeah.
And people started to feel, after he asked all the questions, and he said, you know what, here's the problem. Instead of getting to know each other, we rely on those stereotypes. Instead of saying, wow, we have more in common than I even realized.
Right.
Wow, I'm a middle child. I can relate to that. You're a middle child. Or I grew up in the South. Oh, representing the South, baby.
Yeah.
That love. Finding the commonalities that we have with each other instead of deferring to our fears and stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wish people would do that more, is get to know your neighbor more, have those conversations. Hey, what do you think? Even if they don't watch Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, who cares? Stop watching television. Talk to your neighbor.
Yeah, stop watching TV and start talking to real people.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear that with you, brother. Well, we are at time for our episode today, and if there's anything that we can take away from this, is we need to start talking.
Yes.
We need to start talking, and we need to start seeing each other again and making space for everybody's story. Because, again, we need as humans to be seen and heard. And I think what you're teaching us, and this whole history is starting to teach us, amongst many, 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 many things, is that we as humans need to learn better how to listen and connect to one another, and from the heart, not from facts.
Yes,
like that. Like, let me hear your story. Let me hear where you're hurting, and then allow whatever discomfort that brings up in ourselves for us to deal with that and take action that is right and just in that.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Well, David, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story. I really appreciate that. I, again, just appreciate you taking the time and sharing your emotions, your feelings, your stories, your experiences, and you were seen and heard, and all valid. And I know I'm working on expanding my horizons as well, so that we can come into a stronger place as a country and a nation, for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, thanks, David. And we'll see you guys next time on Fire Starters. Thank you.